one of my favorite pieces of equipment. More specifically, I want to talk about what you should look for if you're going to buy a bulldozer, or if you need a bulldozer, what kind you should get. This is my Komatsu D41A. I bought this at an auction almost 2 years ago now. Haven't got to use it as much as I'd like, but the little I have used it, I've been very pleased with it. Let's take a look at my machine and I can show you the parts you need to really pay attention to if you're in the market for a used machine. Alright, so like I said, this is a Komatsu D41A. It's mid-80s. This is a 6-way blade on this tractor, which I'll get into more here in a minute. As you can see, it's been parked a while. It's got grass growing up in the tracks here. So she's been sitting for a few months. I try to keep the operator's area covered up as best I can, but mice and birds and stuff still get up under the tarp and make a little home. So let's pull the tarp off and see if we can't start this thing up. Alright, so first thing we're going to do on any piece of equipment that's sat for any amount of time or doesn't get run every day, so you don't really know the condition, we're going to check the fluids. This machine, this is how you check the oil. It's showing that we're a little bit low, but we're on a pretty good little slope here, so it's probably pretty close once we put it on level ground. Next we'll check the antifreeze. Right up to the top. That's good. Out here in the woods where I keep this thing, there's a lot of mice and other things, squirrels that make nests. So I'm kind of looking down in here along the motor, especially around the exhaust side, to see if I can see any kind of nests or anything built, because if we're to start this thing up for the first time in a while and there's a nest down in here on the exhaust or something, it could catch fire and potentially burn the whole machine down. So we definitely want to avoid that. Alright, so that fluid's good. There's other fluids to check though. Here on the side is our hydraulic reservoir tank. That's showing that's nothing in the sight glass, but that's because the cylinders weep. I'm pretty sure that's right below this sight glass, and we're not going to run it much, so that'll be fine. This here is your torque converter fluid. That's right about halfway, and plus we're on the slope, like I said, so that should be good. Back here is our transmission oil. Looked to be over full on transmission oil. Interesting. I'll get into what that could mean a little bit later. Yeah. And this machine does not leak any oil from the final drives, but down here is where you'd check those. You'd get a ratchet and pull that plug out of both sides, and I've checked those the last time I ran it and they were both good. So the only other thing there is to check, and we're not going to do it right this minute, is the oil on the winch. I can see it leaks a little bit, so there's a potential for it to be low. So we checked all the fluids, everything looks good, and we're almost ready to start, but you really shouldn't start anything unless you know what the controls are. So there's a few different control setups from dozers, but most are all pretty much the same. Older machines like this one, early machines up till, I don't know, there might even be some machines that are still new like this, but I haven't seen any in the last maybe 20 years. But up until probably the 90s, they made machines like this, which this is hand clutch machines. So this is a direct drive transmission with a power shift. So it's 3 speeds, forward and reverse. You got reverse on this side, 1, 2, 3, and and then this is your neutral, and then your forward is 1, 2, 3, the same way. And you don't have to decelerate or move a clutch or anything. You just keep pulling that thing into the gear you want it in. But these are your hand clutches. So what this does is you pull, say, this clutch here, that stops the power to the right track and lets the left track out track it. So that would make you a right turn. If you pull the right clutch, it disengages the track and you start to turn. If you need to turn sharper, and this specific machine, you can keep pulling further and you'll engage the brake on that side. So it will stop that track altogether and you'll make a hard turn. And a lot of other machines, especially older ones, you need to pull the clutch, and then if you need to turn sharper, you need to push the foot brake in addition. And that'll stop the track and make you make a sharper turn. This over here is your decelerator, not an accelerator. Your car has an accelerator. In a dozer, the throttle is backwards. So if you don't have your foot on the throttle, it's wide open. But you can push it down, and when you push it down, you'll drop the engine to an idle. What that does is make it a lot easier for you to be smooth over rough terrain while you're holding on, trying to operate all the other controls. So it takes a little getting used to if you've never run a dozer, but it's much preferable. So what else? Here's your blade control. This is a 6-way blade, they call it, because this machine, the blade goes 6 directions. It'll go up and down, and it'll tilt side to side, so that's 4 directions, and then it'll angle, which is this lever over here, left or right. So you can make a corner, like a long left or a long right, for keeping material to one side or the other of what you're trying to work on. On this machine, up and down, and then you have your tilt side to side, and then this lever is your angle, so forward and backward will angle your blade left or right. This machine does have one pedal that I've never seen on another dozer, and that doesn't mean they don't exist, but I've just never seen it. This is called an inching pedal on this machine, and this is similar to something most forklifts have. So what this is like a clutch and a brake. You could be pushing something wide open and then just touch this pedal, and it takes the power away from both tracks and stops you. So that's kind of like a good pedal to have if you're doing something on the edge of a hill or something and you're getting close to an edge where you might break over the hillside. You just hurry up and smack that pedal and it'll stop you dead. But you really shouldn't put yourself in that kind of situation anyway. So to start this machine, now that we know the controls and we've checked all the fluid, you're going to need a Komatsu key. And that's something else. If you're new to heavy equipment, a lot of people that are new to heavy equipment don't realize, as most equipment keys are universal. This Komatsu key will start that Komatsu hoe over there, or any Komatsu hoe. And the same with Caterpillar, Case, Bobcat, just about any brand of equipment. The keys are all universal for that brand. And some of them even cross over, like Case and Bobcat are the same key. So this control over here is your master throttle. So if you don't have your foot on that decelerator, you don't want it running wide open all the time, this is your throttle. So you move it right up here to the middle is a low idle. All the way back is full throttle. Now to shut this tractor off, you have to shove this lever all the way down, which closes the injector pump off and kills the motor. Then you shut your key off. So let's start this thing up now. And it hasn't been started in at least 2 or 3 months. It's warm out today, so you definitely don't need glow plugs. In this machine, you don't even really need the glow plugs ever. I've started it when it's been very cold, and it's fired right up with no glow plugs. So we'll turn the key to the on position, turn the key. That's simple. We'll let this warm up a minute before we try and do anything with it. now that we've got this dozer moved to a spot of fresh ground where we can see everything going on, I'll start pointing out some of these things you should be looking for if you're in the market for a used machine. Like I said, I bought this machine at an auction, so I really didn't know the history of it. But like anything you're looking at used, you can kind of get the story of the maintenance on it and the people that owned it just by the way it's taken care of. This machine, when I looked under the hood, I could see the filters and some writing on the engine, and it said that this motor was overhauled at 5,000 and some hours. So there's only 6,000 and some hours on it right now, and I've put some of those on there. So that motor only had around 1,000 hours on it on an overhaul. For a motor like this, that's pretty insignificant. That's pretty low hours. The only things that were wrong with this dozer when I got it are the cylinders for the blade. So all these chrome areas here, like I said, this video is kind of for people that are newer to equipment, but these chrome things are your hydraulic cylinders. Those are going to angle your blade and push the blade where you need it to be. So this side leaks, this one leaks. You can see that tilt cylinder right there is leaking right now. It's dripping. The lift cylinder on the left side was very bad when I bought this machine. This one here was completely blown out, and when you'd lift the blade up, it would just squirt oil everywhere. So I think that kind of kept everybody away from this machine at the auction. But really, that's very insignificant. Those are very easy fixes. I haven't had the time to repair these ones yet, but I did fix this one because it was crucial to even moving the machine. You'd lose all your hydraulic fluid very quickly if I didn't fix that. So I'm going to eventually repack these other 4 cylinders. I have one more lift cylinder over there, the 2 angle cylinders, and the tilt cylinder to repack yet. So those will all be fixed, and that'll take care of all this grease down here that you have on your hard frame. Things to look for if you're looking at a 6-way blade, downfalls to a 6-way blade, is just like I said, these cylinders are prone to leaking. At both ends of every cylinder and every pivot point, there are pins and bushings that can wear out. I sat there and started to figure out how many pivots and pins and bushings there are on this blade one time, and I got disgusted because they're all things that can wear out. So right down here you've got a knuckle. There's 4 there. There's this dog bone up here that helps support your blade. There's 2 there. Each cylinder has 2. Your blade frame has 2. There's just a lot of pivots, so lots of things to wear out. But this one seems to be pretty tight. You can set it on the ground and slowly start to lift it up and down, and that's when you'll see your slop and all those things, and run your controls all back and forth a good bit, and you'll see your slop if there is any. This thing's just about ready for a new cutting edge. Parts of your dozer blade, on any blade, you're going to have corner bits, which is this piece right here, and you can see there's a line right here. This is your corner bit. That is what does your cutting in hard ground. You'll use that corner to bust out the hard ground or rock or whatever you're in. So there's your bolts that hold it on. These cannot be flipped over and reused because they're made the shape they're made. You have to buy new ones of these when they wear out. You can tell they're wearing out when you get down to what's called the mold board. The mold board is the back of the blade that they bolt to. So this has about 3/4 of an inch left before the blade needs flipped and new corner bits need put on. These are not terribly expensive. They're just like putting a bucket tooth on a bucket. It's really common, very reasonably priced, depending on your size of dozer. The cutting edge is here in the center. This one has a 2-piece cutting edge. Here and here, they're just straight pieces, so these can be flipped over and you get double the life out of these. So you can see how thin it is from the bolt down to the bottom where it's worn, and from the bolt to the top, that's new cutting edge there. So this is really about due to be flipped over and new corner bits put on, because if you don't change them, it'll wear down into your mold board on your blade and damage the blade, and then you'll have to do a lot of work to get that fixed. Other things wrong with this dozer, but are not big deals. The blade skin here, it's already been reskinned because there's a weld down the center here. So it's got a newer skin on it, but somebody put this plate on here. I'm not sure what that was for. if that was for pushing up against a pan or what that was for. But there's a crack somewhere. Here it is. There's a crack down here that runs down in the blade. Not a very big deal. I can just grind that out, throw some weld in that. Not a very big deal. The biggest cost you're going to run into with a used machine, if you're not careful, is going to be undercarriage. That's the most common thing, and that's a wear piece, so you want to pay special attention to that if you're looking at a piece of equipment. In your undercarriage, you've got the track chain, the cleats, the front idlers, the drive sprockets, top rollers, and bottom rollers. This machine has 5 bottom rollers. It's hard to check those in a dozer. On a hoe, you can lift the track up off the ground and wiggle them with your hand. And a dozer, it's not so easy. But you can kind of just look at the shape and the profile. You know, if these faces right here where this chain rides, if they're all distorted and worn out, that means the roller's pretty much junk. Now, it can be bad without that being bad if the bearing goes bad. Say if the dozer works in a lot of sandy ground, the sand gets inside the seals and tears the seals out, which lets the oil out, and the sand in, which just eats the bearings out of them. So they can be bad without those being bad. If you can track the dozer around and have somebody watch them while it's driving around, you can kind of see sometimes if they're really bad, they'll be wobbling. Same thing with your front idler. It can, the pin through it could be bad and worn, and it'll usually squeak. Or this face right here where the chain rides in this groove, that can be all rounded over and worn out. Cleats are pretty obvious. The grouser here, it'll be worn down to hardly anything when they're no good. Or check, sometimes the pads will wiggle. There's one on my hoe over there that wiggles, and with that, usually all you can get away with is just cutting the bolts out and putting new bolts in them, and they will be good as new. The big thing to look for is your, I'm gonna make sure this is focused. That pin right there in the track, they'll start to wear right in this area where the sprocket engages them back here. Right up in here where the sprocket grabs a hold of that chain, it'll wear a flat spot on this pin. And if it wears through all the way to the inner pin, then your chain's gonna wear out very quickly from there and not much left of it. So these pins are perfect. There is zero wear that I can feel on these pins, which is ideal. So that means to me that this undercarriage is practically new, because these sprockets back here are also like new. There's very little wear on these sprockets. Another advantage to this dozer over some other brands of this size and age is the sprockets are segments. See all these brakes right here and all the bolts holding them on? So you can change these out without having to take off the track. If these wear out, you just pull this up here, undo 3 bolts, take it off, put a new one on, move the tractor back a little bit, and repeat until you have all those changed. And you don't have to remove the track to do that, which makes life a lot easier. Okay, another good test to do on anything you're buying with a motor on it is get it good and warm. And after it's warm, I'm not going to do it on this because I don't want to lose any antifreeze or get it all over the motor. But you get the motor good and warm, and then take a rag over top of your radiator cap and crack it loose. And when you do, it should be pressurized. There should be water and pressure comes out of that cap. That's why you use the rag, so it doesn't spray all over you, because it's hot, it'll burn you. So if it's pressurized, that's good. That means that you have a closed system, there's no leaks or anything that you can't see. Also, once you have that cap off of there, let it sit and run on a low idle for a while, and make sure you don't see any bubbles coming up into the radiator. If there's bubbles coming up, that usually means that the head gasket's bad, and it's letting compression from the motor get into the coolant side. Let's talk about types of transmission in dozers. These are what you call direct drive, so the motor actually drives a torque converter which runs into a 3-speed transmission. I like these as well. That's why I bought one. There's other ones that are hydrostatic or manual. So a manual transmission is going to be just like this. It drives a clutch just like a standard transmission truck, and you'll have a big stick over here which is a master clutch, and you'll still have a gear selector. Usually not like this. I believe they're usually on the floor. So you'll have a master clutch and a gear selector, and some machines have a reverser. But anyway, so the clutch is just like in a standard vehicle, only you don't use your foot. You'll put it in the gear that you want, and then you'll pull the clutch back, and that'll start you in the direction that you selected. This is nice because you don't have to worry about any clutch. You just pull it, and as soon as you're ready to back up, you just slam it over to reverse, and you'll start going backwards. You don't have to clutch or brake or anything like that. There's hydrostatic type dozers, but I don't think I've ever run one. And what I know about those is sort of like you'll have a drive control over here, and you'll just pull it forward or backwards almost like a small lawnmower, and that runs a hydrostatic transmission, and you'll go forward and backwards. I believe those could be pretty nice, but I think you lose a lot of power with those. So in a bulldozer like this, you're going to want to check your torque converter to make sure your torque converter isn't bad or slipping. To test the torque converter in a dozer like this, you're going to want to do a brake stand. Push both your brakes on, and then with the motor running wide open, pull it down into first gear and see what the motor does. You're going to listen to the motor. If the motor starts to bog, you have a good torque converter. And as soon as you hear it start to bog, put it back into neutral or let off the brakes. You don't want to hold the brakes on while the motor's trying to spin. You just want to do that long enough so that you can tell if the torque converter is going to slip or not. If you're holding both brakes and you put it into first gear and nothing happens, the motor stays revved up right where it was, then your torque converter is slipping. Obviously, with anything you're going to buy, you should really try it out the best you can at the place you're looking at it. You want to make sure you drive the dozer back and forth good and get the motor good and warm. You want to try it in all 3 gears to make sure the gears shift nice and that the motor pulls right. You want to, if you can, push some dirt with it. Make sure you've got good power. Make sure that that's another way you can test your torque converter. If you run into a pile of dirt and the motor doesn't bog and you just stop, then your torque converter is slipping. Run the blade through all those functions just like I did. So tilt the blade and do all that kind of thing. While I'm on the subject of blades, let's talk about the other kinds that there are. Like I said, this is a 6-way blade, so it does all these fancy functions, which is nice if you're going to be doing a lot of grading work and slopes and that kind of thing. If you're just needing a farm dozer to push trees out and that kind of thing, you can get away with just having a stiff arm blade, they call it, which is usually a little bit wider than a 6-way blade on the same size tractor, and it's going to be a beefier, stronger blade. You're going to have a C-frame, they call it, that runs around the outside of your tracks and ties in back here in the middle. So these bolts right here would be where the C-frame would bolt to. It would pivot there, and your cylinders would lift that whole thing up and down, and your blade will have arms that come down and engage that C-frame. Now, some of those tractors will still be able to manually angle and tilt, which are my favorite kind. So you'll have 3 different holes on the side, and you can remove the blade arms and angle the blade manually. And then maybe it'd still have tilt cylinders up there. The other type of blade is a U-blade. That's usually on bigger dozers. If you need a U-blade, you probably already know what you're looking for and you're not watching this video, but a U-blade is for pushing material longer distances, keeping bigger piles in front of you, containing the material rather than letting it spill over the sides of the blade. They're usually much taller. The last thing I can talk about are accessories for a dozer. My dozer is equipped with a Heister W5B, I believe it is, winch, which is a self-contained hydraulic winch. This has 7/8 cable on it right now, I believe. It's either 7/8 or an inch. I think there's about 100 or 150 feet on this drum. And this is a very strong winch. You can pull a lot of stuff with this thing. And it's great if you get yourself stuck down over a hill somehow. You can anchor it to another piece of equipment or a couple trees and use it to pull yourself back up over the hill. Or you can use it for letting somebody else down over a hill so that they don't get stuck like we do in pipeline stuff. We'll hook a bunch of dozers together, bigger dozers than this. We'll hook a bunch of dozers together on a big hill and connect the hoe to the end of it and let them down over a steep hill so that they can work safely without overturning. The other kinds of accessories that can go on the back of a dozer like this are rippers. Rippers look just like big chisels that stick down into the ground, and they bust up the ground to make it easier for you to doze it. There's multi-shank rippers, and then there's single shank rippers. Single shanks more for rock and very hard ground. Multi-shanks usually for breaking up like hard clay and things like that. And they really do make it a lot easier for you to be able to plow dirt up with the blade after you've ripped it. So this is what your basic winch looks like. There's other configurations you can get a winch like this. There's what they call fair leads, which is it'll have kind of like a frame built out around the end of the winch here with rollers on it so that this cable could pull in any direction and it won't wind up off the drum. You can see there's a lot of wear here into the steel, which is what happens when somebody's not paying attention. They're pulling the cable in and it's not winding up directly over the drum. It's winding up over the edge and it's dragging right here, which wears out all this metal. I didn't do this. This is how I bought it. I haven't really used this winch at all since I got it. The other kind of setup for a winch would be like a logging arch or a logging setup for a winch, which would be just like your fair leads down here, only it'll have like a riser box that comes up maybe about 4 feet higher than the winch. And all that does is get your cable from a higher vantage point so that when you lift up on the logs, it gets the front ends off the ground a lot easier and you can drive without dragging the logs in the dirt as much and plowing into things with them. So those are the things I look for when I'm looking at a dozer, aside from the obvious checking for leaks and things like that. When you get there, try to look underneath the machine where it's been parked. Make sure the final drives aren't leaking. Make sure the engine isn't leaking. Make sure the cylinders aren't leaking. That's the easiest leak to fix in my mind, is the cylinders. Sometimes they're hard to get the glands apart, but after it's apart, they're usually pretty easy to change. So that's enough talking about dozers. Let's see what this one can do. So that's my Komatsu D41A, and that's what I look for when I'm buying a used piece of equipment, specifically a bulldozer. Let me know in the comments if you guys check for anything else when you guys are buying equipment, or if you're thinking about buying equipment, let me know what you're gonna get. They're awful fun toys. They do cost a lot of money to maintain and operate though. But if you play your cards right, you can make a lot of money running them. So That's where I'm at.